to Deep Sleep Stories. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. If these stories help you relax or fall asleep, a short review, comment, or sharing the podcast with someone who might benefit is a simple and meaningful way to support the show so that we may continue to offer it for free. Now, take a slow, gentle breath and let's begin tonight's story.
Welcome, dear listener, to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight you will drift into a quiet world of warm wool and whispered poems where soft yarn and gentle words are woven together like starlight through a window. For now, there is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to solve. Let your body find a comfortable place to rest. If you like, let your eyes soften and close or grow heavy as you listen. Feel the surface beneath you holding your weight with steady kindness. The ground, the bed, the chair, whatever cradles you right now, is enough. It supports you so you do not have to support yourself. Take a slow breath in. Let it rise in your chest, then your ribs, then your belly, and then exhale gently, as if releasing a quiet sigh no one else can hear. Again, breathe in, letting cool, clean air fill you with a sense of space and softness. And breathe out, letting the day fall away a little more. Any thoughts that linger can float far to the edges, like leaves on the surface of a still pond. You do not have to chase them. You do not have to stop them. You are simply listening. Tonight's story will lead you to a small valley where snow falls softly, where wool is spun by lantern light, and where poems are spoken so quietly they sound like the hush of the winter wind. The world there is gentle, patient, and unhurried, waiting for you to drift alongside it. Let your breath be slow and easy. Let your jaw loosen, your shoulders drop. If there is any place in your body that feels tight or tired, imagine warm light resting there, like a soft blanket, easing the tension away. You are safe here. You are allowed to rest. And as you continue to breathe, the story begins. In a small valley tucked between low, rounded hills, there was a village where the roofs were capped with snow for half the year, and where the nights were longer than the days. Smoke curled from chimneys in soft threads, and lanterns glowed behind frosted windows, turning each pane into a square of pale gold. In this village lived a weaver named Mira. Mira's cottage sat at the very edge of the fields, where the stone wall gave way to open hillside and the gentle wandering of sheep. Her home was small, but inside it was full of warmth. Bundles of wool in soft, cloud-like tufts hung from the rafters. Skeins of yarn draped over chair backs. Woven blankets lay folded in careful stacks, each one with its own quiet story. People said that the blankets Mira made were different from any others in the valley. They said that on the coldest nights, if someone lay very still under one of her woolen quilts, they could hear faint whispers rising from the threads like the sound of distant waves or wind moving through pine trees. Sometimes those whispers sounded like poems. Of course, no one could ever quite remember the words in the morning. They only recalled the feeling, the sense of being wrapped not just in warmth, but in belonging, as if the blanket knew every worry and had gently, kindly smoothed each one away. Mira never claimed that her blankets were anything special. She only smiled with a quiet, thoughtful curve of her mouth when villagers mentioned the whispers. She would pour them tea, lay a folded blanket over their knees if they looked cold, and listen to their stories instead. Because that was what Mira loved the most. Stories. Short, long, or wordless. Stories told in sighs and pauses, in the way someone's eyes softened when they spoke of home. Each evening, the villagers brought their days to her cottage like a basket of wool, and as she carded, spun, and wove, their voices wove themselves into the rhythm of her work. Every story, she believed, left a trace. On a clear winter afternoon, when the air was so cold it made small crystals on the sheep's wool, Mira left her cottage with a basket on her arm. The sheep were scattered up the hill, their coats thick and soft. Their breath drifted in pale clouds as they nudged at the snow-covered grass. She walked slowly, her boots crunching in the thin crust of frost. The sky above the valley was wide and pale, like a blank page waiting for words. Mira always liked this time of day, when the sun hovered low and the light seemed to come from everywhere at once, gentle and diffuse. She found her favorite sheep near the stone wall, an older ewe with a coat the color of fresh cream and eyes that always seemed to be listening. Mira knelt beside her, resting a gloved hand along the ewe's neck. "Hello, Willow," she murmured. Willow turned her head and bumped her nose softly against Mira's shoulder. The sound of their breathing rose and fell in quiet rhythm. Around them, the rest of the flock moved slowly through the field, the bells on their collars giving off faint, chiming sounds that floated into the still air. Mira took a length of spun yarn from her basket and tied a small braid into Willow's thick wool, a simple habit she had begun when she was very young. When she was a child, she had believed that tying a tiny braid into a sheep's fleece invited gentle dreams into the wool. Now grown and practiced with years of weaving, she still liked the feeling of this ritual, the careful fingers, the quiet focus, the sense that something kind was being promised. Above the hills, a few wisps of cloud drifted by, tinted faintly pink. Soon, the first star would appear, bright and patient. Mira breathed in the cold, clean air and let the peace of the moment settle around her like a cloak. She did not know that tonight her work would cross a small, invisible threshold. That tonight, warmth and words would tangle together in a way that would be remembered for a very long time. When she returned to the cottage, the last light of day was slipping away. She lit an oil lamp on the table, its flame small and steady. Shadows softened along the wooden beams, and the shelves lined with folded cloth. The room smelled of beeswax, dried herbs, and wool warmed by many hands. Mira set her basket down and took up her carders, pulling the raw wool into soft, billowing clouds. With each stroke, she hummed an old tune. There were no words to it, not anymore. The words had long ago dissolved into the melody and the motion of her hands. The sound drifted through the cottage, gentle and familiar. As the wool grew smooth and even, Mira paused. There was a feeling in the air, like the moment just before snow begins to fall, when the world holds its breath. It felt as though unseen threads stretched from her cottage to the hills and beyond, humming very softly. She shook the feeling off and began to spin. At her spinning wheel, her foot moved in an easy, practiced rhythm. The wheel turned, the wool slipped through her fingers, and fine, strong yarn twisted into being between her fingertips. She thought of the people of the village as she worked, the baker who worried over his daughter's health, the shepherd who missed a brother in a distant town, the older woman who lived alone and sang to herself as she swept her doorstep. Their stories were part of her day. She carried them with her as she carried her basket of wool, as she carried the quiet of the valley itself. Tonight, though, another voice rose from memory. It was her grandmother's voice, soft and low, from long ago evenings when Mira was small and drowsy by the fire. Wool remembers warmth, her grandmother had said, and warmth remembers words. Speak kindly to the wool, and one day it will speak kindly back. Mira had laughed then, thinking it a sweet, impossible idea. But over the years, as villagers spoke of whispered poems in their sleep, she had wondered if there was truth in it after all. Not magic exactly in the way of fairy tales with spells and sparks, but something gentler. The way a well-loved scarf carries the memory of the hands that wrapped it around a child's shoulders on a cold morning. As her spinning wheel turned, Mira found herself speaking to the wool in a low, steady voice. You are warmth, she murmured. You are softness. You are a place where tired hearts can rest. Carry their stories if you wish. Carry them gently. Her words were not quite a poem, not yet. Just a drift of phrases like fallen petals on water. Still, the wool ran through her fingers with a new ease, as if it understood. Later, when the skeins were wound and ready, she placed them beside her loom. The loom stood near the window, its wooden frame familiar as an old friend. Outside, the night had deepened, and snow had begun to fall in slow, drifting flakes. Each flake met the glass and vanished, leaving a brief spark of cold behind. Mira lit another lamp and poured herself a cup of tea. Steam rose from the mug, carrying the scent of chamomile and mint. She wrapped both hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. The cottage was quiet, but not empty. The ticking of the small clock on the shelf, the whisper of snow against the roof, the faint rustle of wool as it settled in its baskets. All of it made a soft, steady background, like a gentle, ever-present poem. When she had finished her tea, Mira rose and threaded her loom. Tonight's blanket would be for no one in particular. Sometimes she wove on commission with a name in mind, a face, a worry, or a wish. Tonight she wanted to weave simply for the valley itself, for all who lived under its sky. The warp threads stretched before her, waiting. She drew the newly spun yarn through, the shuttle sliding back and forth in a slow, measured rhythm. The loom answered with its quiet, wooden voice, the same simple sound, repeated over and over until it folded into the heartbeat of the evening. As she wove, words came to her. They did not arrive in a rush, but in small, steady pieces like snowflakes. Each line took its time, each image rested on the edge of her thoughts before settling into place. Warm wool for weary bones, soft threads for heavy hearts, a blanket for dreams to nest in. She did not speak all of them aloud. Some she only breathed, lips moving, voice no more than a sigh. Some she only thought, letting the feeling of the words flow instead of the sound. She imagined the yarn soaking in those quiet poems, the way dry soil drinks in the first drops of rain. Outside, the snow thickened. The village below her cottage seemed to grow softer, less defined. Roof lines blurred, pathways vanished under white, and the chimneys were the only sign of life, their gentle smoke still rising. Time stretched. The blanket grew. Line by line, row by row, the wool arranged itself into a pattern of subtle shades. Cream and pale gray, soft brown, and a whisper of blue appeared where the yarn had caught the last light of the day. The design was not bold. It was the sort of pattern one noticed only after a while, a suggestion of hills perhaps, or the curve of a sleeping lamb, or simply the rhythm of breath. As midnight approached, another presence seemed to join Mira at the loom. It was not a figure she could see, nor a voice she could clearly hear. It was more like a gentle attention, watching with her, listening with her, as the wool and the words wove together. The cottage felt fuller, yet more peaceful, as if the night itself had stepped inside to rest beside the fire. The old clock ticked on the shelf. Snow brushed the window. The wool slid through her hands. And somewhere in the valley, a child stirred in her sleep, turning onto her side and curling into a ball. Her blanket shifted, and for a moment she thought she heard something. A soft murmur, a line of verse, kind and comforting. She did not wake. She only sank deeper into her dream. In another house, a man sat at a table with a letter in front of him, ink still drying on the page. He felt a heaviness in his chest, an ache of missing someone far away. But over his shoulders, a shawl made from Mira's wool lay like a gentle hand. He too thought for an instant that he heard words spoken just at the edge of hearing. Rest now. You are not alone. He could not say where the thought came from, only that it felt like something the wool itself might say, if wool could speak. Back in the cottage, Mira wove until her eyes grew heavy. At last, she tied off the final thread. The blanket hung complete on the loom, a quiet, unassuming thing. And yet, as she looked at it, she felt the same sense she had felt earlier in the fields. Something held, something waiting, as though the blanket were a book closed around unwritten lines. She lifted it from the loom with care and folded it over her arms. The weight of it was satisfying, solid yet gentle. She laid it across her narrow bed, smoothing the edges with slow hands. Tonight, she decided, this blanket would not leave the cottage. Tonight it was for her and for the listening silence around her. She banked the fire until it was only a glow, lit by deep embers. The lamps were dimmed to small halos of light. The snow outside had thickened into a white hush that seemed to muffle even the clocks ticking, wrapping the whole valley in soft quiet. Mira slipped under the blanket and drew it up to her shoulders. The wool greeted her with its familiar scent, a mix of lanolin and air, and something that always reminded her of fresh clouds. The warmth gathered around her slowly, without rush, as if it wanted to be sure it was welcome. She lay on her back and listened. At first there was nothing but the sound of her own breath, the slow in and out like waves on a faraway shore. Her heartbeat settled, her thoughts softened. The room felt distant, as if she floated just above the bed, held by invisible hands. Then from somewhere near her ear, a whisper rose. It did not start like a voice. It began as a feeling, a slight tingling, a gentle hum. The threads of the blanket seemed to shift against one another as though they were adjusting themselves. "Warm wool," the whisper said. "Warm wool for weary bones. Rest now, little weaver. Rest in the valley of snow." The words were simple, like the first lines of a song a child might make up on a quiet afternoon. But they carried a weight of gentleness that made Mira's eyes sting with sudden, slow tears. More words followed, unhurried, each one cradling her as surely as the blanket did. The loom is still. The day is done. The stories you hold can sleep. The voice, which was not exactly a voice, felt familiar and new all at once. It sounded like her grandmother, and like her own mind, and like the soft hush of snow on the roof. It carried the timbre of the valley, of the sheep, of every quiet evening she had spent at her wheel. Mira did not move. She did not seek to answer. She simply listened. The poem unfolded, not in sharp lines or intricate rhymes, but like a gentle, wandering stream. It spoke of the hills and their slow, patient watching. It spoke of the sheep with their steady gaze, and of the people sleeping in their homes, each surrounded by worries like small stones. It spoke of how those stones could rest tonight, just for a while, set down beside their dreaming beds. Every phrase landed softly in her mind and then dissolved like snowflakes on the palm of a hand. Warm wool remembers, the whisper breathed. It remembers the hands that spun it. The stories that brushed its fibers, the hopes that sat quietly nearby. In the village, though no one woke fully, several sleepers turned in their beds and smiled without knowing why. A child released a small frown that had lingered from some forgotten concern. An old woman's hand softened its grip on the edges of her blanket. A dog, curled under the kitchen table, let out a long, contented sigh. The blanket around Mira seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the bed, beyond the walls of the cottage, draping itself over the valley, tucking each roof and field and sleeping creature into a shared warmth. The whispered poem went on, quieter now, its lines growing shorter, like footsteps slowing at the end of a walk. Rest now. Rest. The night is wide. The stars are kind. The words faded, leaving only the feeling of them behind. Mira's breaths had grown long and easy. Her thoughts drifted, no longer clinging to any shape. The last thing she was dimly aware of was the sense that the blanket was not finished, that it was still listening, still learning the silent poems of every dream it touched. Outside, the snow fell in softer flakes. The hills watched as they always had, with their untroubled patience. The valley, wrapped in white and wool and whispered words, settled deeper into its sleep. Hours passed. The night turned slowly on its quiet axis. The moon, hidden behind clouds, traced its pale arc overhead. In dreams, Mira walked through the fields without feeling the cold, Willow trotted by her side, her wool coat glowing faintly from within as though holding a lantern of its own. Overhead, the sky was thick with stars, each one pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Strings of faint, silvery letters drifted among them, incomplete poems waiting to be found. She walked not to reach anywhere, but simply to move through this dream valley, to see how the snow lay on the stone walls, how the frost traced delicate patterns on the dried grasses. The world was familiar and new at once, as if the blanket had taken her everyday home and turned it into a poem on her behalf. When the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, a softening of the dark rather than a burst of light, the dreams grew even gentler, dissolving like mist at the edge of a quiet lake. In the cottages below, one or two hearths stirred to life. A log shifted, embers brightened. The clock in Mira's home marked the passing moments, but to her, those moments were like the slow, steady breaths of someone still deep in sleep. The valley stayed hushed. Even waking was unhurried here. There was no rush of alarms, no sharp calls. Morning would come in its own time. Until then, rest was allowed to linger, to stretch, to deepen. In the soft gray stillness, the blanket continued its silent work, holding warmth, holding stories, holding every sleeper in a shared, gentle embrace. And somewhere far above the valley, beyond the snow clouds, beyond the thin air, beyond even the highest, faintest stars, the whispered poems rose like threads of light, not loud enough to disturb anything, not firm enough to change the course of any world, but just enough to surround everything they touched with a quiet, remembering kindness. As the story folds itself around you now, the pace grows slower, like footsteps turning into stillness, like a wheel coming gently to rest. Breath by breath, the world of the valley drifts to the edge of awareness. Mira's cottage grows dim and distant, like a lantern seen from far up the hill. The sheep lie in their enclosure, the village roofs lie under a soft veil of snow, and the blanket of warm wool continues to cradle all who sleep beneath it. Your own breath moves in a calm rhythm, in and out, like the loom's shuttle once did, back and forth, weaving rest through your body. Muscles soften, thoughts loosen their grip and slip quietly into the background. There is nothing you have to hold on to right now. The night can hold you instead. The words of the poem have faded, but their kindness remains, like warmth lingering in a room after the fire has burned down. You rest in that warmth. You float in it, weightless and safe. The valley is quiet, the hills are watching. The snow is still. Warm wool surrounds all who dream. Let your eyes grow heavy, if they are not closed already. Let your breath fall into its natural, unhurried pattern. The story has done its work now. There are no more tasks, no more scenes, only this softness, only this calm. Sleep can come like a gentle blanket, tucking itself around you with silent hands, listening to your own private poems of hope and memory and wish. It will hold them for you while you rest. Drift now, down into the quiet, down into the deep, peaceful dark. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.